friends, in the series which we are doing on issues in world history 1, the 20th century, and in the earlier lectures we talked about the meaning of the Second World War and the way the causes of the Second World War, the way war unfolded in the context of the various kinds of situations which were prevailing across the world. And today we will talk about some of the arguments which have been given by some of the scholars with regard to the Second World War. We will talk about the codes of the Second World War, what happened in the different arenas where this particular war was fought, and we will also talk about the consequences of the war, that how the world changed after the Second World War, as has been argued that the balance of power in the context of the power of the various countries at that point of time, it changed, and how the world saw the two superpowers, America as well as USSR, and the kind of power which was enjoyed by France and Britain earlier, it diminished in that kind of a comparison. So we will have a look at the various kinds of the theaters of the war where this war was fought in some kind of a chronological manner, and then we will also talk about the kind of consequences which were there with regard to the war. And as has been discussed earlier as well, we have seen that it was argued that the Treaty of Versailles was seen to be as one of the reasons where we find that Germans, they were not happy, especially Hitler, who criticized Treaty of Versailles, and the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles over a period of time, they were being rejected by Hitler time and again, and they were violated as well. And scholars, they have tried to see the way Hitler functioned in a particular manner, and his plans regarding the kind of policy which was to be followed by Germany, they were being discussed in Mein Kampf, which was his autobiography. And Trevor Roper has argued in this particular context that they have been given in Mein Kampf, and J. Noax and G. Pridham, they have pointed out that Judas Buck, another book which was written by Hitler in 1928, it describes the foreign policy program of Hitler in 5 stages. So we find that whatever was written by Hitler, that was in a way later seen by these scholars, they tried to in a way match that what he talked about and what was written by him, and the kind of steps which he took with regard to the various kinds of domestic and foreign policy matters. So in that sense, we realize that if Mein Kampf and Jutersburg, both of them, they are seen to be some kind of a blueprint for Hitler's policy, then they in a way convey his designs with regard to what he is going to do in future. So when we find that the various kinds of policies which were followed by Hitler, Blitzkrieg was one of the policies which he followed with regard to the war. That Blitzkrieg means the war with the lightning speed, which Hitler engaged. So all these kinds of concerns we find when we talk about Hitler, and the first stage which was being talked about was the elimination of the limitations of the Treaty of Versailles, including the demilitarization of the Rhineland. So we find that how Treaty of Versailles, it was not liked by Hitler and the other Germans, those who felt that Germany was at a receiving end because of the Treaty of Versailles, and they were trying to in a way do away with the various provisions of the treaty, including the demilitarization of the Rhineland, which was considered to be an important area for them. And apart from this, that was one of the initial stages in which Hitler engaged in such kind of activities, and we also find that the end of the French scheme of the coalitions in the Eastern Europe and the establishment of German control over Austria, Czechoslovakia and Poland was the second stage, and Hitler also does function in this particular manner, where he is trying to in a way secure these areas for Germany. Then the conquest of France was the third, where we find that Hitler also in a way tries to deal with the situation in such a manner, and thereafter he would attack Russia, and he does as well. in the last stage would be a fight for the world hegemony against Britain and US. So we find that the way situation unfolded over a period of time, and Hitler in a way attacked these countries over a period of time, and scholars, they have tried to see some kind of a connections between what he wrote and what he did eventually, and Stephen James Lee also points out close parallels with what really took place in this way. And we see that if you see the execution of the various ideas of Hitler, we find that the disarmament provisions of the Treaty of Versailles were reversed between 1934 and 35, and Rhineland was remilitarized in 1936. So this can be compared in a way with what was in a way written in the Jutersburg as well as Mein Kampf, and we see that how Austria was annexed in 1938. The idea of Anschluss, the union with Austria was in a way took shape, and how Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia was with Bohemia following in March 1939 and Poland in September 1939. So these kinds of annexations which were done by Hitler at that point of time, and the policy of appeasement which was followed by other countries like Britain and France, because of which we see that Hitler became more bold in that sense, and he realized that these countries were trying to appease him in a certain manner so that he does not go to war. And thereafter we see that how France was attacked in 1940 and Operation Barbarossa was started in 1941, and Hitler declared war on the USA in 1942. So Stephen James Lee argues that these developments appear to imitate the program in Jutersburg. Therefore, the case for premeditation is indeed strong. So such kind of arguments, they were being in a way communicated by the scholars, that how such kind of parallels could be seen in the functioning or executions of Hitler's plan and what was written in Jutersburg, which was a text which was written by Hitler in 1928, which never got published. So in that sense, we realize that Hitler had some kind of predetermined plans, and he was trying to in a way execute those predetermined plans according to the way he had in a way thought about. And scholars, they have also seen these kinds of parallels. They have given evidences as well that how he in a way unleashed his ideas, and thereafter the execution of these ideas could also be seen in the manner, the way they were being communicated in the texts which were written by him. So such kind of parallels could be understood, and the kind of stages which have been talked about, which have been explained, they also in a way attest the activities as well as the ideas of Hitler, that they had some kind of a consonance between them. And when you talk about the kind of causes, as we have done earlier, that how different kinds of causes they were responsible for the Second World War, and we find that many a times it is also being argued that the Second World War was Hitler's war, and Hitler was in a way seen to be the prime mover who was instrumental in that sense that war unfolded. And as we talked about the policy of appeasement and how policy of appeasement was seen to be one of the factors for the war, scholars like Alan Bullock, they argued that the success and the lack of resistance allowed Hitler to move further, to take the larger risks, and this is what he did. And A.J.P. Taylor has argued that Hitler's intentions were not to cause a major war. He expected at most a short war with Poland. So scholars like Taylor, they have argued that Hitler was not going for a major war, he was just looking for a short war with Poland. And he has also argued that the kind of thrust which has been given to the premeditated ideas of Hitler and seeing Mein Kampf and Jutersburg as some kind of a blueprint of his policies. So Hitler was not all that a kind of a person who had designed everything. Rather, he says that Hitler was an exceptional opportunist who took the advantage of the mistakes which were committed by the appeasers. and the kind of events because of which some kind of a crisis was created in Czechoslovakia in February 1939, and the German occupation of which was not the consequence of an ominous long term plan. So, we find that when Taylor argues that he was an opportunist, he was ready to take advantage of the various opportunities which were being created at that point of time, and because of which he was trying to take the advantage of the mistakes of his appeasers. And we also see that how the kind of a crisis which happened in Czechoslovakia in February 1939 also provided him an opportunity. And we find that these kinds of ideas which we see in the kind of execution of these ideas which was committed by Hitler was also as a result of his swift execution of the plans and the understanding of the foreign policy. And Taylor has argued that the Hitler did not have a strategy for the world invasion, rather he anticipated that others would offer opportunities and he would grab them. So, in that way we see that Hitler Taylor Hitler has been seen as an opportunist, and this opportunist is ready to take advantage of all the kinds of opportunities which is being provided to him. And in this case we find that how he miscalculated the situation which was prevailing at that point of time, and he believed that Britain and France would not militarily support Poland even after his invasion. So, in this way we find that how Taylor was trying to see in this particular framework that Hitler was lured into the war almost by accident after the Poland incident or the invasion of Poland. And so, in this way we find that it has been argued that it was some sort of a miscalculation by Hitler. He did not anticipate Britain and France to join the war in support of Poland. And on the other hand, there are other scholars, those who have tried to in a way interpret the particular situation in their own way. T.W. Mason, for example, has criticized Taylor for focusing too much on the series of diplomatic actions, and Stephen James Lee has pointed out that the focus on diplomatic events, they overlook the two significant tendencies which contributed to Hitler's foreign policy. So, the focus on the diplomatic events has also been criticized by scholars, and we also see what Stephen James Lee has in a way pointed out, that how German historians have shown a substantial degree of continuity between the aims of Hitler on the one hand and those of the Second Reich and the Weimar Republic on the other. So, we see that German scholars, they say that there was not a great change when you see some kind of activities which were undertaken by the Second Reich and the Weimar Republic. They were in a way continuous in that way, and what Hitler was doing was in the framework of the earlier traditions which were prevailing in Germany at that point of time. And we see that how Fischer has argued that Germany was on an expansionist route well before the Nazi period, and that Hitler inflated this into a notion of Lebensraum. So, Fischer's idea that how Germany wanted to expand itself even before the Nazi period, they wanted to show them as a great power, and how Hitler brought this idea of Lebensraum or the living space into the picture, and because of which we find that he wanted to expand more and more. And if we see the kind of influences on foreign policy followed by Hitler, and then we find that in that context there was a lot of influence of the domestic economy as well, and a number of contemporary historians, they have argued that there is a straight connection between the Germany's economic difficulties and the performance in the quest for an expansionist policy in Europe. So, the kind of economic distress which was being in a way this kind of economic distress which was in a way being felt by Germany because of the various kinds of policies in the framework of payment of a lot of indemnity to other countries, and taking away a number of areas which were with Germany in the mandate by these victorious nation. So, all of them, they created a kind of a situation where we find that Germany was at the receiving end from the economic point of view. So, when we find, as I talked about, blitzkrieg, which was an economic as well as a military strategy that way, because blitzkrieg also meant the war with the lightning speed. And so Sawyer has argued in that sense that it was both as a kind of an economic as well as a military strategy. And the way it was being developed, it was developed to allow Germany to escalate rearmament without causing the German consumer extreme distress and thereby divesting the establishment of its backing. So, we find that this kind of a strategy would also suit the German consumers, because if some kind of a long war continues, then it will also provide them some kind of a distress. So, we find this kind of support which was being given to blitzkrieg was also in this context as well. And then apart from Fischer, we also see that German historian Joachim Fest has argued that Hitler's desire to bring things to head so fashioned the proceedings that any wish to compromise on the behalf of the Western countries was definitely lead to a knot, and his total calling was geared towards war. So, German scholars, they also have tried to see Hitler's situation and his desire or his ambition, and he wanted this thing to come to a head, so that any kind of a compromise with the Western nation should not take place, and he wanted that the war should happen. And when we in a way talk about the way war unfolded in different parts of the world, and Norman Love has in a way identified 4 distinct phases of this war. And one of the first phase of the war was in the context of the opening moves, and they took place between September 1939 to December 1940. The Germans and the Russians, they occupied Poland by the end of September 1939. So, we find that when you talk about the various phases of the war, the way the war was fought, and then we find the introductory part in the opening moves from this particular period, and we find that how the Germans and the Russians, they in a way occupy Poland by this particular period, and how they in a way partition Poland on 29th September 1939 as agreed in the August Pact or the non-aggression pact. The next 5 months saw very little activity in terms of war, and the American press referred to this pause in the war as the phony war. In April 1940, the Germans occupied Denmark and Norway as well, and we see that in 1940 May, attacks were made on Holland, Belgium and France, who were quickly defeated. So, we find the Hitler's policy of blitzkrieg was providing him results, and he was very keen to follow this kind of a policy, where we find Germany captured northern France and the Atlantic coast and occupied France. The unoccupied France was permitted its own government under Marshal Pétain at Vichy, but it was devoid of independence and collaborated with Germans, leaving Britain alone to face the enemies. And we find that how Mussolini had declared war in June just before the fall of France as well. So, these kinds of developments, they were happening at that point of time, and how the Hitler's effort to bomb Britain into capitulation was frustrated in the Battle of Britain, which was fought from August to September 1940. And it was seen to be as the first major turning point of the war, which checked the German invincibility, and how Mussolini's armies, they invaded Egypt in September 1940 and Greece in October 1940, but were soon driven out of both the places. So, in a way, we find that how Mussolini proved to be some kind of an embarrassment to Hitler. The way Hitler was fighting war initially, he was successful, but Mussolini was not all that successful. So, in this way, he was turning out to be some kind of an embarrassment to Hitler. That was the first phase of the war, as Norman Love has talked about and or in a way communicated or discussed in his work. And we find that the next stage, which was the second stage, was the Axis offensive, which widened from 1941 to the summer of 1942, and how the war in a way transformed into a global clash now, and how Germany now helped Italy to recover Egypt and captured Greece. And Hitler launched an invasion of the USSR, which was Operation Barbarossa, on 22nd June 1941, defying the non-aggression pact signed in August 1939 between them. So we find that this invasion of USSR by Germany proved to be some kind of a nemesis for Hitler, because he in a way continued, or this kind of a war between them, it carried on for a very long period of time. Then it was being anticipated by Hitler, and this proved to be some kind of a fatality to the designs which Hitler had, and it also turned to be some kind of change in the fortunes of Hitler in terms of the way he was winning earlier. And some scholars, they see it in a framework of some kind of the biggest mistake which was made by Hitler. And on the other hand, we find that Hugh Trevor Roper claims that to Hitler the Russian campaign was not a luxury, it was the be all and end all of Nazism. It could not be delayed, it was now or never, because they were trying to position it in the framework of the ideological conflict as well, that how Nazism was opposed to communism, and if Hitler would not have attacked Russia, then from the ideological point of view also it would not have been the Hitler's war as he wanted it to be. And we find that the other developments in the framework of the Japan's attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor on the Hawaii Islands on 7 December 1941, and how this brought Americans into the Second World War, and Japan thereafter occupied territories in the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, in the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and 2 American possessions, Guam and Wake Island. So we find that how Japan's militarism or Japan's aggression resulted in Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in America, and how when America was attacked, then America also joined the war, which proved to be detrimental to the interests of both Germany and Italy, because America's might in terms of the economic force and its own military and armaments, they also proved to be detrimental to the campaigns which were launched by Hitler and Mussolini both. And we see when this kind of a thing happened, then Hitler declared war on USA as well, and we see that it was a mistake, as the combined strength and resources of USA, Russia and the British Commonwealth proved to be a great challenge to the Germans. So when we see that how Russia, America and British Commonwealth, all of them, they in a way clubbed together, and how their resources, they were a great challenge to the kind of resources which Germany had. And we find that when we tend to understand the kind of behavior which was exhibited by the Japanese and the Germans in the occupied areas, it was very brutal and demeaning. And we find that how the Nazis, they treated the masses of Eastern Europe as subhumans fit for being slaves of the German race. So that was another kind of a situation which was also not good from the humane point of view, as well as from the point of view of the masses or people. And we find that not only Germany but Japan as well, and how it was treating the conquered people in one of the worst manners, and this caused a lot of resentment among the masses, and they could not secure the support of the people in the conquered areas. So when they were being maltreated, they were being mistreated, they were not ready to support both the Germans as well as the Japanese. And when we see the next phase, where we find how from summer 1942 to summer 1943 the offensives, they were held in check during this time, and we find that in the 3 different areas of war, the Axis powers, they were defeated. Firstly at the Midway Island, June 1942. In the Pacific, the Americans defeated a powerful Japanese force, and the breaking of the Japanese radio code by the Americans and the splitting of the Japanese forces provided the advantage to the Americans. So we find that during the 3rd phase, where the war was being fought, largely the Axis powers, they were getting defeated in different arenas, and how Japanese, they were also getting defeated during this time, and the way the Japanese radio code was broken by the Americans, and how we find that Americans, they were proving too strong for the Japanese in that sense, and it in a way took away the initial advantages which Hitler had with regard to the war. So, we will continue further about the Second World War in our next lecture. Thank you very much.